Last meeting. We're mortgaging our future to impress headlines. Ethan smiled that politicians smile. Uncle, you built Argent on grit. Let me build it on vision. I should have fired him right then, but I didn't. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted them all to believe the throne was theirs for the taking. Then came the night everything broke. It was a Friday in late October when Lover called me. Freuerker, voice shaking. Dan, they've filed the documents. They're pushing you out officially. Majority vote affecting on my balcony. Overlooking the city I'd conquered, the neon skyline glittering like the world was mocking me. Good, I said quietly. Let them have it. Lover was silent for a moment. You planned this, didn't you? Every. Last signature. By Monday, they held the press conference. Ethan stood behind my old podium, flanked by smiling executives, announcing that he was now the majority owner of Argent Industries after a peaceful transition. My name trended online for 48 hours hashtags about old leadership giving way to new blood. They even aired a tribute video. I stayed quiet. I watched. Première wetted. The first cracks appeared within weeks. Those expansion contracts? Each one was tied to debt facilities I'd structured years before secured against dormant shell entities I still controlled indirectly. Argent Industries had, on paper, acquired those shells when I transferred assets to Ethan's consortium. What they didn't realize was that each shell came with multi-million-dollar liabilities, supplier loans, unpaid credit facilities, and leveraged notes that hadn't been called in. Yet, the bankers did the rest. When the first $3 million note matured, Ethan's finance team panicked. They thought it was a clerical error. Then the second one hit. Then the third. I watched as they scrambled to renegotiate, refinance, and cover their tracks. But the numbers didn't lie. Argent's new ownership structure was a financial noose, and every move they made only tightened it. Ethan called me after the second month, voice trembling. Uncle Dan. We need to talk. I pretended not to understand. About what? Ertz. Then why didn't he know it? The banks. You inherited the company, didn't you? I interrupted. You inherited all of it. He was silent for a long time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. You set me up. No, I said softly. You set yourself up. You Judith read the fine print. Now, sitting across from him, and the others, my so-called heirs, I can see the realization dawning in their eyes. All their ambition, all their scheming, had led them right into my design. You can sell it, I tell them. You can try to pay it off. Or you can dissolve it and watch what's left of your reputations burn. Ethan stares at the envelope like it's a ticking bomb. You destroyed everything. No, I correct him. I built it. Do you didn't Rutcliffe? Office that used to be mine. I catch my reflection in the glass holder, tired, but victorious. Let them choke on the empire they stole. The company may fall, but the lesson will remain. You can inherit a crown, but you can't inherit a king's patience. Ethan's voice cracked through the silence just as I reached the door. You think this makes you some kind of hero? You ruined your own legacy. I turned, the echo of my shoes deliberate against the polished floor. No, Ethan. I preserved it. The company's name was my legacy. Its soul was mine. What you took was just a body already rotting. His jaw tightened, the fury barely contained. You think people won't find out what you did? When the media learns you hid liabilities in offshore shells, they'll learn I interrupted. That the new leadership failed to perform due diligence before a major acquisition. They'll see your signatures, not mine. You inherited everything, legally. Including the rot. Lover once told me revenge never satisfies. But as I watched Ethan's hands tremble over the envelope, his expensive watch glinting under the fluorescent lights, I realized satisfaction wasn't what I wanted. I wanted silence. I wanted him to understand. The silence stretched too long, so I broke it with something softer. You could have asked me, you could have waited. Everything I had was going to be yours anyway. Ethan looked up, eyes burning. You never would have given it up. You built this whole thing around yourself. We were suffocating under your shadow. Then you should have learned to breathe in the dark. I left them there. The sound of their panic muffled behind the heavy glass doors. The city outside smelled arena. Tweede thought mattered. Now, All that mattered was what came next. I had no company, no family left worth naming, and no one to answer to. But the strange text leads luxury, almost tolot. Lovra met me at the elevator. She'd been waiting, leaning against the chrome wall, eye sharp as always. You really went through with it. They had a choice, I said. You could have stopped it. I pressed the button for the lobby. And undo 3 years of their planning. That would have been cruel, she sighed. You know what's coming, right? Investigations, audits. You might be clean, but they'll drag you into it. Publicly. Let them, I said. They'll find exactly what I want them to. The elevator doors closed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the descent was almost peaceful. Then Lovra said, you could have retired quietly. Sold it, walked away, lived by the beach like you always talked about. I smiled faintly. Retirement is for men who still have something left to lose. Outside, the rain had turned into a steady downpour. My driver waited at the curb, the wipers sweeping rhythmically. I told him to take me to the docks instead of home. The water was black and endless, reflecting the city lights like shards of broken glass. I stood under an umbrella, watching the freighters roll out. One of them bore the faded Argent logo, a shipment I'd arranged months ago. Machinery, spare parts, obsolete now. Still, it would keep a handful of loyal employees paid for another quarter. I wasn't heartless. Juste finished. Lover joined me, her hair whipping in the wind. What happens now? I kept my eyes on the water. They'll try to save it. Maybe they'll sell assets. Maybe they'll drown trying. Either way, Argent's story ends with them, not me. And you? I'm thinking of starting something smaller. Something tritingtigino, almost bitter. You sound like a man who's still fighting ghosts. I glanced at her. Maybe I am. But at least they're my ghosts. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She'd been with me since the early days when the office was a rented warehouse. And our only investors were family, loans, and half-broken promises. She'd seen the rise, the power, the slow corruption that came with it. I warned you about Ethan, she said after a long pause. No, I also told you not to trust yourself too much. That made me laugh, and I hadn't laughed in a long time. Guess you right when je left, I stay the rain blurred. The truth was, I didn't hate Ethan, not entirely. I hated what greed did to people, how it turned ambition into justification. He wanted to prove he could outsmart me. He just never realized I'd spent half my life learning from men who tried the same. 2 days later, the headlines came. Argent Industries faces $20 million debt exposure, new leadership under fire. The articles quoted anonymous insiders about mismanagement, arrogance, and oversight failures. Ethan's photo was everywhere, sharp suit, forced smile. I watched it unfold from a small cafe near the waterfront. The owner didn't recognize me. Nobody did, anymore. Lover called again. It's worse than expected. They're hemorrhaging cash. The creditors are circling. They're begging for your statement. I have nothing to say. They're blaming you, Dan, saying you hid the debts. I stirred my coffee slowly. Of course they are. That's what cowards do when they inherit consequences. Silence. Then, softer, you sure you're okay with this? Laura, I said, for the first time in 20 years, I don't have to be in charge. I'm fine, but that night, alone in my apartment, I found myself standing before the old company, ledger, the one I'd kept in a drawer long after everything went digital. Every page told a story of a decision, a risk, a small betrayal. Last page, written in my own handwriting. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what refuses to die after you do. That was arrogance, maybe truth. But I knew one thing: Argent wasn't built to last forever. It was built to test who deserved to carry it, and tonight, they finally learned the answer. The morning after the news broke, I woke to a dozen missed calls and 3 voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. The vultures had begun to circle again: journalists, analysts, maybe even the investors who once toasted to the future of Argent. I didn't bother listening. I already knew what they wanted. A quote, a confession, a scapegoat. But I had no interest in feeding the story. I'd already written its ending. Instead, I walked to the pier before sunrise. The city was still half asleep, its towers veiled in mist, its noise softened by the sea air. The gulls shrieked over the empty docks, and the wind carried the scent of rust and salt. I'd always liked the ocean. It reminded me that no empire, no matter how powerful, could control everything. I pulled my coat tighter as the wind cut through, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel the weight of it all. Not the guilt I'd made peace with that, but the fatigue. Building Argent had been my life, yes, but it had also been my cage. Every success demanded another. Every victory hit a cost I didn't pay until much later. I was free now, technically. Yet freedom felt suspiciously like exile. Lavra found me there just after dawn, her car tires crunching on the gravel. She stepped out holding two coffees, the steam rising like ghostly whispers between us. "You're predictable, you know that?" she said, handing me one. "Old Mena," I replied. "We find a spot and stick to it." She smiled faintly, then got straight to it. "Ethan's gone to the press. He's spinning it as you're doing claims you sabotaged the company before stepping down. Says he discovered legacy debts you hid offshore." I sipped the coffee, slowly. "Of course he is. They're building momentum," she continued, the sex asking questions. "Investors are lawyering up." "He's desperate, Dawn. He's trying to make you the villain." "I am the villain," I said, my voice calm. "Just not the one he thinks." Lover studied me for a moment. "You could clear this up. You could show them the filings, the time-stamped transfers. You've got proof this was all above board." I agreed. But then what? They fixed the headlines. Apologize. Pretend they didn't stab me the moment they smelled blood. She hesitated. "You're still angry." I shook my head. "Not angry. Just finished." She looked unconvinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she took out her phone and showed me something. A news clip. "Ethan Flodium. The Frau of the Journée d'Omerd Mer." His expression was practiced, the right balance of outrage and victimhood. My uncle's actions were unforeseen, he said into the microphone. "But Argent Industries will endure. We're rebuilding. We will honor the employees who the bon US left." The performance was flawless. Even wore the same tie I used for quarterly briefings. "Rebuilding," I murmured. "That's one word for it." Lavra pocketed her phone. "He's setting you up for a fall. Let him, Den. I know, you want him to learn, but this could destroy you too." I turned to her, my voice steady. "He already destroyed me, Lavra. All I'm doing now is showing him what that feels like." She didn't respond, and the silence that followed was long and heavy. The kind of silence where truth hums quietly between two people who've seen too much to lie. After a while, she said softly, "You know, maybe this isn't about revenge. Maybe you're just trying to bury what's left of you with the company." I looked out toward the horizon, the endless grey blur of water and sky, and thought about that. "Maybe," I said. "But something's rotting. You don't bury it to hide it. You bury it to keep it from spreading." She didn't argue. The day dragged on, and by evening, the story had already evolved. News outlets called it Argent's collapse scandal. Analysts debated who was truly responsible. Some painted me as the conniving founder who booby-trapped his own empire. Auteur qu'elle dit. Poetic justice, a cautionary tale of greed devouring itself. I didn't correct them. Every version was partly true. But as the chaos grew, so did something else. Whispers of a shadow investor group quietly buying up Argent's distressed assets. Someone was scooping up pieces of the dying beast. Was uphold Rekleven. And the name tied to the shell company doing it stopped me cold when Lavra showed me the paperwork. LNN Holdings, Lavra, and Nathan. Nathan, her ex-husband, the financial tactician who used to advise us before things went sour. The man who knew exactly how to weaponize a crisis. "You're in on this?" I asked, staring at her. She hesitated. "I'm stabilizing what's left. Done. People's jobs are on the line." "You may not care, but I do." "I didn't destroy the workers," I snapped. "Ethan did. The board did." "Don't pin that on me." "I'm not," she said quietly. "But if I can save what's salvageable, I will." "You burned the house down." "I'm just making sure the fire doesn't spread to the neighborhood." There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Resolve, maybe disappointment. Or both. "You're not doing this for them," I said finally. "You're doing it for yourself." She met my gaze evenly. Maybe, but at least I'm doing something. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had returned, tapping against my window, like fingers demanding entry. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat at my desk, staring at an old photograph. Me, Ethan, and Laura at Argent's 20th anniversary. We looked like a family then, maybe in some warped way. We were. I thought about what she'd said, that maybe I was trying to bury myself with the company. She wasn't wrong. Argent was more than steel, contracts, and profit margins. It was the scaffolding that had held my life together. And now, watching it crumble, I didn't know if I was watching its end or mine. But then a thought came to me, slow and deliberate, like a snake uncoiling. If L&N Holdings was buying Argent's carcass, maybe I could use that. Maybe there was still one move left to play not. To save argent, properly. Because if there's one thing I'd learned about men like Ethan, it's that they never stopped reaching for what they thought they deserved. And maybe, just maybe, I could give him one final lesson he'd never forget. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called Laura. When she answered, I said, "Let's meet, somewhere quiet. We need to talk about your new company." She didn't answer right away. On the other end of the line, I could hear the soft shuffle of papers. The faint hum of office noise, the world continuing, moving forward, rebuilding itself on the ashes I'd left. "Finally," she said, "you're not going to like what I have to say." "Don, I rarely do," I replied. "Meet me anyway." There was a long sigh, the sound of resignation and history mingling in a single breath. "The old pier," she said. 30 minutes, the old pier. Of course, every confrontation worth remembering seemed to end there. The salt in the air, the grey horizon, the scent of rust and rain-soaked wood. I grabbed my coat, my mind a quiet storm. When I arrived, Laura was already there, standing under the skeletal frame of a derelict warehouse. The sky above was bruised with clouds, the wind cutting through the silence like glass. She didn't move when I approached, just kept her arms folded, her expression unreadable. "You've been busy," I said. She turned. "And you've been watching L&N Holdings." Not subtle. I wasn't hiding it. "That's the problem," I said. "You're doing this like it's clean, like it's noble. You think you can resurrect Argent? You can't resurrect something that was born on compromise." Her eyes narrowed. "You think everything's a war, don't you?" "Not everything has to end in ashes. Everything worth owning does," I replied quietly. "Otherwise someone else just takes it and pretends it was theirs all along, like you did with your father's company," she said, and I froze. It was a low blow, and she knew it, but it landed clean. "Argent wasn't my father's," I said through clenched teeth. "He built something small. I built something impossible." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "No, Don, you just built his mistakes bigger. You turned his fear of losing control into a doctrine." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind howled through the gaps in the old building, making the walls groan like a dying ship. I finally said, "So this is about redemption for you. This is about survival," she countered. "For people who didn't have the luxury of your grudges." "Dito you know how many employees are still waiting on paychecks that'll never come? How many families are sitting at kitchen tables right now, wondering if they'll have to sell their homes because of what you and Ethan did?" I wanted to tell her it wasn't my fault, that the debt traps were a lesson, not a weapon. But when the words reached my throat, they felt hollow. Maybe I hadn't thought about those families. Maybe, in my quest to teach one man a lesson, I'd punished 100 innocents instead. "You think rebuilding it will fix that?" I asked finally. "No," she said, shaking her head. "But it'll give them something to hold on to. You talk about legacy, but you've forgotten what one actually is." She reached into her coat and handed me a folder. Crisp, heavy, deliberate. "These are the acquisition documents for L&N's purchase. We're absorbing the salvageable assets, shipping lines, logistics branches, contracts that still hold value. It's legal, transparent, clean, and yes, Ethan knows. Of course he does," I muttered. "He's probably already planning to take credit for it." Her silence confirmed it. "So what's this, then?" I asked, tapping the folder. "An invitation. You want me to bless this rebirth?" "I want you it," she said. "Fear no more, Gem. Let it end here, Dan. I almost laughed. You think I can just walk away? You already did, she said softly. You just haven't admitted it. The wind carried the words away. I didn't want to look. I opened the folder. Everything was there. The signatures, the valuations, even the restructuring plan. It was meticulous, efficient, the kind of thing Lovra would design, ruthless enough to work, but humane enough to be forgivable. One line stood out near the end. Argent Industries Holdings, dissolved upon acquisition completion. You're erasing it, I said. I'm freeing it, she replied. And freeing you, if you let me. For the first time in years, I didn't have an immediate response. I stared at the papers, the ink signatures that meant finality, and felt something unexpected stir in my chest. Not anger, not regret, something closer to relief. But relief felt too much like defeat. I built this with my blood, I said quietly. You can't just rebrand it out of existence. I'm not rebranding it, she said. I'm burying it. Properly this time. We stood there for what felt like hours. Neither of us moved. The gulls screamed over the waves. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the world went on pretending our war didn't matter. Then she said something that cut through everything. You're the only one keeping it alive now. Dawn, the debt, the ghosts, the bitterness, it's all you. Let it die. I turned away, looking at the horizon, the faint glimmer of dawn breaking through the fog. Maybe she was right. Maybe me garroder. Become addicted to the idea of control, of ensuring that no one could rewrite my story. But in the process, I chained myself to the ruins of it. I handed the folder back. You're making a mistake, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Maybe, she said. But at least it's mine to make. She left without another word. I watched her car disappear down the pier road until the taillights were swallowed by the fog. When she was gone, I sat on the edge of the dock, staring at the black water. The waves lapped against the wood, steady and patient, the way time erodes everything, even pride. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, the last copy of Argent's master ledger. Every transaction, every debt, every secret, it was all there. The story of how we rose, how we fell. The evidence that could clear my name. Or damn hers and Ethan's forever. For a long time, I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight. The temptation was still there, whispering like an old friend, you could end them. One email, one leak, and they'd crumble. But for the first time, the whisper didn't sound like victory. It sounded like exhaustion. I looked at the water again. Then I tossed the drive into the sea. It vanished with barely a splash. And just like that, for the first time since Argent began, I felt something close to peace. Because I finally understood, sometimes you don't win by holding on. You win by walking away. But peace is never permanent. And by the warning you world gon stijburje, especially when they smell blood in the water. The call came just after dawn, slicing through the fragile quiet like a blade. My phone buzzed across the nightstand, and though I didn't recognize the number, I answered anyway. Some habits never die. A pause, then a voice I hadn't heard in months. Uncle Don, Ethan said. His tone was different this time, lower, quieter, almost frayed. There was no aura, no smoke polish, just exhaustion. I was wondering how long it would take, I said, rising from the bed and moving to the window. The sky outside was still grey, the kind of pale light that makes everything look unfinished. So, which is it? You want to blame me again, or you need something? Hesitated. Both. That almost made me laugh. At least you're honest now. Please, he said, and that word, please, caught me off guard. I just need to talk. In person. No lawyers. No cameras. Just you and me. You're a little late for family therapy. I know, he said. But it's bad, Uncle. It's really bad. I should have hung up. I should have told him that he'd made his bed and deserved every splinter of it. But something in his voice, something fragile, human, pulled me in. Against my better judgment, I said, where? He named a place. Not the office, not some hotel suite where journalists lingered for scraps of scandal. A small diner on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place where the coffee is burnt and nobody asks questions. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting in the back booth. Elucedalt of the armor. That once made him dangerous. The tailored suits, the perfect hair, the smug smile, gone. Just a man who'd been chewed up by his own ambition. He stood when he saw me. Thanks for coming. Didn't do it for you, I said, sliding into the booth. I wanted to see what defeat looks like. He didn't argue. As you know, Dad, signal it's for coffee. Thora. Long while, we said nothing. The sound of rain against the window filled the silence, steady and relentless. Finally, Ethan spoke. They're coming after me, he said. The creditors. The regulators. Everyone. The restructuring isn't working. The assets are tied up in cross debts. And now, with the press digging into everything, no one's willing to touch us. We're bleeding. Cash. I stirred my coffee. That's how debt works, Ethan. It bleeds you dry while smiling in your face. I didn't know. Don't lie. I cut in. You didn't care. You wanted Zoba crown so badly seeing the curl kid doon shikering across his face. I thought I could fix it. You thought you were smarter than me. I finished for him, and maybe you are. But you're not wiser. He leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. Uncle, I need to know something. Did you plan all of it? The shell debts, the offshore notes, the timing. Did you want this to happen? I took a long sip before answering. I planned to protect what I built. The collapse, that was your doing. You're the one who fed the beast after. I chained it. He ran a hand through his hair, trembling. They're saying I could face charges. Fraud, misrepresentation, negligence, hell, even conspiracy. And Lavra, what about her? She's being investigated too, he said. L&N Holdings got flagged for potential conflict of interest. They think she's covering for me, that twisted something in my gut. Lavra didn't deserve that, not after everything she'd tried to save. She's clean, I said. They won't find anything. They'll find me, Ethan said bitterly. And that'll be enough. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not the kind that comes from losing money or status, but the kind that comes from realizing you've lost yourself. He looked at me then, as if searching for some trace of the man who once taught him everything. Was this all a test? He asked. All these years, the mentorship, the trust, the handover, was it just one long test to see if I'd fail? Première mais. His gaze. No, I said softly. It was a chance to see if you'd be better than me. The words seemed to hit him harder than any accusation could have. He slumped back in his seat, staring out the window. The rain had turned heavier, streaking down the glass like slow tears. After a while, he said, they're going to take everything. The board's already splintered. Investors are pulling out, and the government's breathing down our necks. I don't have any moves left. There's always one move left, I said quietly. He looked up, desperate. Then tell me, please. I hesitated. Because the truth was, there was one move left, but it wasn't salvation. It was surrender. You dissolve it, I said finally. Alors fit. Liquidate what's left, pay what you can, and bury Argent for good. No press conference, no promises. Just end it. He stared at me like I'd just asked him to cut his own throat. You're asking me to destroy everything. I leaned forward. No, Ethan, I'm asking you to stop pretending it's alive. He didn't answer. Just sat there, staring at the tabletop, his reflection fractured in the puddle of spilled coffee. After a while, I stood to leave. You wanted to be a king, Ethan, but kings don't last. Empires fall, names fade, and crowns rust. The only thing that endures is whether you can live with what's left. I started to walk away when he said something that stopped me cold. Uncle Don, he said quietly, if I do this, if I end it, will you help me? I turned back slowly. Help you? He nodded, not to save it. Just to bury it right. You were right. Argent was never just a company. It was a family, a history. If it has to die, I want it to die on your terms, not theirs. For a long time, I said nothing. The rain drummed on the diner's roof, drowning out the world outside. And in that silence, something old and bitter inside me softened. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something adjacent to it. All right, I said finally. Unless. Time. He looked up, startled. But understand this, I added. When it's done, we walk away. No phoenix, no resurrection. We end it properly. Clean, final, permanent. He nodded slowly. Deal. And as I left the diner, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life or the only right choice left to make. Because once you start digging graves, you eventually find one. With your own name on it. We met 2 nights later, in the one place that had once symbolized everything Argent stood for, the headquarters. The building loomed over the skyline, like a monument to arrogance and ambition, its glass facade reflecting the city lights in a way that made it look eternal. But inside, it was hollow. The lobby lights flickered, half the offices were empty, and the echoes of what used to be hummed through the marble floors like ghosts whispering. Toyashote. Ethan was already waiting in the boardroom when I arrived. The same room where we'd once toasted record profits, where he and his allies had voted me out. Funny how time rearranges the meaning of places. He was pacing when I entered, his shirt sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, papers spread across the long conference table, like a crime scene. When he looked up, there was no trace of the smug who doubts macht only a few weeks. I didn't think you'd come, he said quietly. You asked, I said, closing the door behind me. I said I'd help. He nodded, then gestured to the table. Everything's here. The financials, the legal documents, the dissolution drafts. I've gone through them 100 times, but it still feels like I'm signing a death certificate. That's because you are, I said. Companies die too, Ethan. They just leave bigger funerals. He gave a faint, humorless smile. So how do we do it? Step by step, I said. First, we close the accounts. Pay off the debts that can be paid. Secure severance for the employees. Then we release the assets, the ships, the warehouses. Everything that can still stand on its own, finally. I tapped the stack of papers labeled Final Dissolution. We kill the name. He stared at the documents, then at me. It doesn't feel real. It will, I said. It always does when the ink dries. We worked in silence for hours. The sound of papers shuffling, pens scratching, keys clacking filled the air, the quiet chaos of endings. Every document signed was another heartbeat fading, another memory turned to dust. Around midnight, Ethan leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Do you ever regret it? Which part? I asked. All of it. Building this, losing it. Fighting for it. I considered the question for a long time. Regret is a luxury, I said finally. You can't build something like Argent if you stop to feel bad for what it takes from you. You just keep elukedatmalersnan lurching. That's what I was afraid of, becoming that. Too late, I said softly. You already did. He laughed bitterly. Guess it runs in the family. We went back to work, signing the last few documents under the pale light of the boardroom lamps. The city outside was a glittering reflection of everything we'd once wanted and everything we'd lost trying to have it. When it was done, Ethan slid the final file toward me. Last signature, he said. I took the pen, my hand steady despite the tremor, in the air. My name looked strange on the page, the same signature that had built this empire, now being used to erase it. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of it all pressing down. Then I signed. I said, it's done. He exhaled, leaning back as if something inside him had just broken loose. You know what's funny? He said, when I was a kid, I used to come here and watch you work. I thought you were a god, like the whole world moved because you told it to. It did, for a while, I said. Until the world remembered it didn't need me. He looked around the boardroom, eyes glassy. I thought if I could just be like you, I'd never have to feel small again. I met his gaze, and did it work? He shook his head slowly. No, it just made me feel emptier. Then you learned something I didn't until too late. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's something. At least, we sat there in silence, the ghosts of our ambitions crowding the air. First time, I saw him not as the usurper, not as the arrogant nephew who'd tried to take what I built, but as the boy who'd once followed me through factory floors, eyes bright, asking how engines worked and how deals were made. Somewhere along the way, we'd both forgotten who we were trying to impress. The sound of thunder rolled in the distance. Rain began to patter against the glass, steady and rhythmic. Ethan stood, looking at the city below. What do you think happens now? Now, I said, we let it go. We walk out that door and never come back. He nodded slowly, then looked at me. You think people will remember Argent? They'll remember what it cost, I said. That's enough, he smiled, a small, tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. Goodbye, Uncle Don. He turned and walked out before I could respond. His footsteps echoing down the corridor like the last sound of something that had finally run its course. I stayed behind chair across fry the setted dawn. The rain had turned heavy now, drumming against the glass like applause or mourning. I couldn't tell which. Then, on impulse, I stood and walked to the wall, where our portraits hung, mine, Ethan's, the board members. I took mine down first, then his. One by one, I removed them all until the wall was bare. Legacy doesn't live in buildings. It lives in stories. And stories, I'd come to realize, only end when you stop trying to rewrite them. I turned off the lights and left the boardroom for the last time. The sound of the rain followed me all the way to the elevator. Down in the lobby, I passed the empty reception desk, the marble floor, reflecting the flicker of failing lights. I paused for one last look at the golden plaque that still read Argent Industries. I ran my fingers over the letters, then whispered, "Rest now," as I stepped out into the storm. I thought about the ledger I'd thrown into the sea, about Lovra, about Ethan. Maybe they'd rebuild, maybe they wouldn't, but for the first time in decades, I wasn't trying to control the outcome. I walked away without looking back, my coat billowing in the wind, the rain washing the last traces of dust from my hands. And for the first time in my life, I felt light. But the thing about endings is, they never stay that way. 3 days later, I got a message, one line, unsigned, but unmistakably hers. "You should see what Ethan did." I stared at the message for a long time. The glow of the screen, flickering against the rain-streaked window. "You should see what Ethan did." No greeting. No context. Just those 7 words, coiled and silent, like a serpent waiting to strike. I tried calling her. No answer. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. The message was sent at 3:14 a.m. That was Laura's way. She only reached out at strange hours, when the truth was heavy enough to break through her restraint. I threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and stepped out into the night. The streets were slick, the air thick with the metallic scent of oncoming rain. I didn't know where I was going exactly, but I had an idea. Argent Tower was dead. But ghosts, I was learning, didn't obey locks or leases. By the time I reached the building, the guards were gone, and the revolving doors stood half open, as if someone had forced them. Inside, the lobby lights burned dim, casting long, eerie reflections across the floor. I knew shouldn't have gone on anymore. At least not about something. About that message felt like gravity. The elevator still worked. I rode it up to the top floor, the hum of the cables sounding almost alive. When the doors opened, the hallway was dark except for the faint glow spilling out from the boardroom. Ethan was inside. He was sitting at the head of the table, my old seat surrounded by papers, his laptop open in front of him. The air smelled of stale coffee and desperation. "You look terrible," I said quietly. He didn't flinch. Just kept typing, eyes fixed on the screen. "You shouldn't show Elined Buck," the chingneath him. "Guess neither of us knows how to leave this place." I stepped closer, the soft hum of the building echoing beneath my footsteps. "What did you do?" "Ethan étourné the laptop toward me. The glow of the monitor illuminated, his face hollow, sleepless, wild around the edges. On the screen was a document, a press release draft. The title made my stomach tighten. "Argent reclaims its legacy," a statement from Sir Ethan Caldwell. I read the first few lines and felt the blood drain from my face. He wasn't dissolving the company. He was resurrecting it. "You signed the dissolution papers," I said sharply. "It's over. I voided them," he said. "Ifund." I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air itself seemed to shift, as if history had come to collect one final debt. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. His voice was softer now. "Different?" I nodded. He sat beside me, the wood creaking under our combined years. For a long time, we said nothing. The Schreibstress, grand calme. Finally, I asked, "How?" "Did you find me?" Lavra told me. He said, "She's alive." He smiled faintly. "Very much." "She's somewhere in the Alps, I think. Sent me an address once, then disappeared again." Sighed she needed peace. "She always did." He nodded. Then, after a pause, he said, "They dropped the charges." I turned to him. "You're free?" "Free enough," he said. "They took everything, but they let me walk." Première geste. Realized it wasn't fraud, just hubris. "That's a fine line," I said. Yeah, he murmured. And I crossed it. He reached into his coat and pulled something out, a small, weathered envelope. He handed it to me, without explanation. Inside was a check. Not much by corporate standards, barely enough to buy a car. But attached to it was a single line, written in Laura's handwriting, for what remains unburied. I stared at it for a long time, feeling something between a laugh and a sigh catch in my chest. I started a small firm, Ethan said quietly. Consulting. Real work this time. No investors, no board, no illusions. Just me and a few people who still believe in what business should be. It's enough. I studied his face, the sharp edges of youth. Worn down by consequence, the arrogance replaced with something fragile but genuine. You sound like a man who finally understands what he was trying. Maybe I do. A gull swooped low over the water, its reflection rippling across the waves. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You know, for years I thought you hated me. I did, I admitted. But not for what you did. For how much of me I saw in you." He nodded, eyes glistening in the fading light. "Guess we both built the same monster." "No," I said softly. "We just fed it." The sun slipped beneath the horizon, painting the sea in deep, molten gold. The sound of the tide filled the spaces between us, steady and eternal. After a while, Ethan stood. "You'll hear from me," he said. "Not soon, but one day, when I've built something worth showing you." I looked up at him. "Then build it the right way this time." He smiled small, sincere. "I will." He turned and walked down the pier, his silhouette fading into the dim light. I watched until he disappeared into the distance, swallowed by fog and time. When he was gone, I looked back at the sea, the same sea that had taken everything I once thought. Betrayal. I thought about Laura in her quiet exile, about Ethan's fragile redemption, and about the ghost of a company that had taught us all what the word empire really meant. Argent was never about steel or profit or power. It was about hunger. About the human need to be remembered, even if it meant burning the world to leave a mark on it. But legacies don't live in names. They live in lessons. I stood, feeling the wind press against my coat, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fight it. The sea roared below, endless and indifferent, and I realized that maybe that was the point. The world moves on, with or without our empires. As I turned to leave, a single memory surfaced. Ethan, as a boy, chasing me down a factory floor, shouting, one day, "Uncle Don, I'll make something even bigger than yours." I smiled, not with pride, not with regret, but with a kind of quiet hope. "Then do it, right this time," I whispered to the wind. And as the waves broke against the pier, carrying away the last echoes of Argent's name, I walked toward the fading light, unburdened, unbound, and finally, at peace. Day, when I've built something worth showing you. I looked up at him. "Then build it the right way this time." He smiled small, sincere. "I will." He turned and walked down the pier, his silhouette fading into the dim light. I watched until he disappeared into the distance, swallowed by fog and time. When he was gone, I looked back at the sea, the same sea that had taken everything I once thought. Betrayal. I thought about Laura in her quiet exile, about Ethan's fragile redemption, and about the ghost of a company that had taught us all what the word empire really meant. Argent was never about steel or profit or power. It was about hunger. About the human need to be remembered, even if it meant burning the world to leave a mark on it. But legacies don't live in names. They live in lessons. I stood, feeling the wind press against my coat, and for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fight it. The sea roared below, endless and indifferent, and I realized that maybe that was the point. The world moves on, with or without our empires. As I turned to leave, a single memory surfaced. Ethan, as a boy, chasing me down a factory floor, shouting, one day, "Uncle Don, I'll make something even bigger than yours." I smiled, not with pride, not with regret, but with a kind of quiet hope. "Then do it, right this time," I whispered to the wind. And as the waves broke against the pier, carrying away the last echoes of Argent's name, I walked toward the fading light, unburdened, unbound, and finally, at peace.